work, but he went one place and I went to another place. So I went back to 4B. So I went through...
along with other people?
Yes, there was maybe 5 or 6 of us, something like that.
And so you were considered the worst of the worst? Then?
Yeah. At that time...
What was your physical condition?
Well, that time when I was captured, I was about 165 pounds. Hard infantry training and really put on me. At that time, I must have been close to 100 pounds, maybe. A little bit more, maybe. And I had broken out in edema. My legs had swelled. And I don't know what they were. We used to call them malnutritional ulcers. Ulcerations on my legs that didn't seem to want to heal. They, didn't have enough nutrition to heal. You had to have food to do it. We didn't have it. So we got back to 4B. And things there weren't any better. It still was, as I said, it was a transit lager. All that meant was that the guys would come in, and then from there they'd send them out on work commandos. They'd ship them all over Germany from that place. That was the labor pool. That's what basically it meant. Interesting thing there. I can't remember the date, but I think it was about this time. One morning, all these white trucks roll in, and all these guys get out. And it's the bulk of the police force from Copenhagen. They had been arrested because they had run up the Danish flag on the King's holiday. I think Denmark was under monarchy then, and he refused to put it down. So the Germans arrested the whole police force. And they came into our camp. Well, they got regular stuff from home, food and stuff like that. And at that time, I had a Schaefer pen. I still have. I don't have it anymore. I had no ink, so what gives a pen to it? And so we used to barter a lot. There was a bartering system set up,
Cigarettes and...
American cigarettes were the best, and I think it was 1 American cigarettes got you 3 English, 5 French, and 7 Russian cigarettes. That was the exchange was there. Anyhow, I went there with this pen, and evidently they knew what a Schaefer pen was. And in those days, I guess it was a well-known pen. So I went there with my friend Joe, who's passed away since then, and got a hunk of bread and a Danish sausage, like a big salami. Now we're going to die. It was, we had to share it with a couple other guys because, you just automatically shared. It was, if I'd eaten the whole thing, I think I'd have killed me. And, but it was something to have the Copenhagen police force. Anyway, we had, as I said before, the Russians had their own compound. The Americans and the British were in one compound. French were in another. They nationally kept them separated. And one thing that got me was the Muslims who were part of the French and part of the English army, the English Indian Army. No matter how lousy their food was, they would not eat any pork product. They were starving just like we were. They would eat no pork. And I thought, geez, it's pretty something, because it's amazing. The life in the camp, as you asked earlier what you do, you roamed around sometimes around this big plaza, sort of, and you tried to make deals if you could, and just talk to people. There was nothing else to do, really, nothing to do. And couldn't do it very often because it got to the point when I went back to 4B. They had like picnic benches in the I knew what to do. And you learn by experience. I stood up too fast, and I passed out. Just fell back down. And the reason was I cut off the blood supply somehow. So then you learned when you got up, you put your hands on the table and went up slowly. And then that was okay. You learned how to do that.
What was the sleeping arrangement?
Sleeping arrangements, they had about, it was boards, and they had what the British used to call palliasses, which was nothing but a burlap sack full of straw. And there was 2 men to the bunk. So it was, 2, 4, 6, 8 guys. Hot. Interesting, and since I had started architecture, these barracks were built and put together, I could figure it out, with wing nuts. They could take those things down and haul them off someplace and put them up someplace else. That was really ingenious what they had done. But by this time, everything in Germany is starting to deteriorate. The war effort just trying to get to them. And so we stayed there until April 23rd. On April 23rd, we were liberated by the Russians.
Let's stop there then. Before that, so you were in prison for about 2 months or 3 months?
3 months.
3 months.
Yeah.
And what was your knowledge of the progress of the war? Anything? Had there been any newspapers that had circulated through?
No, we knew what was going on. Every morning, the British would come around, and they would read the German news first. And then they'd say, they'd look around, and I don't know, they had a radio somewhere. And they'd give you the good news. The German news was always, our troops valiantly defended the Oder River at Breslau, but retreated to the west side, that kind of stuff. So we knew they were moving toward us, not necessarily day by day, but we knew when President Roosevelt died. We knew how the battlefront was moving.
And that obviously boosted morale, right?
Yeah, actually, though, that the desire and the want of food was the paramount thing. That's all he ever talked about was getting something to eat, food. And I was fortunate in this respect. I didn't myself suffer from any beatings or anything like that, like a lot of guys did. I saw some, but they weren't even with our guys. When I was down at 4A, we were walking back from that work we were supposed to be doing. We passed about 6, 7 Slavic girls. I don't know whether Polish, Russian, God, who knows. And they threw us some potatoes. And the old guard goes over and he butts the girl who was closest to him. He just rammed her with his rifle and knocked her down. Then he made us give all the potatoes back. So they wouldn't even let us have those lousy little potato chips. And then I thought to myself, the Russians probably ended up getting them all anyhow. So it made me feel better. Yeah. So no, food was the thing. How those people, those guys in the Japanese prisons did, I'll never be able to figure it out. But
so it didn't get better. Your desire for food never.
No,
ceased,
it didn't get better at all. We had watery soup, and sometimes, see, as I said, the British ran the camp, and so then our barracks, everything was done by barracks. And there were so many people in the barracks, and then they drew rations according to the people in the barracks. Like if some guys went to a hospital, or my good friend went to jail, and he said, I went to visit him. He says, "Hey, get yourself in jail. Food's better here."
Always on the
yeah,
bread.
always figured that, and they count twice a day to make sure the numbers were correct. And so they issue you so many liters of this, I guess it was rutabaga soup or whatever it is, and cabbage or whatever, and supposedly a vegetable. And then they were given, they being the English, were given this ration of bread and whatever they were going to give us. And then we, in turn, being the Americans, would go up and draw the ration for, I think it was 7 guys, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly. And it turned out that I ended up being the guy who had to distribute this. And if that wasn't a thing, you know, because you had 6 other guys looking at you, and you had the potatoes were like this, you know. They weren't potatoes like we know. And you'd line them up by size this way, and then you put over maybe there was a spoonful of sugar, and it was all on paper. We didn't have too much, and pieces of bread were cut and measured very closely, and then butter, whatever they gave us. Then you had like cards. So if you had cards, that was good. If you didn't have cards, you'd take pieces of paper if you could, and you'd write numbers on them. Like if there was 7, you write 7. And then this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then you write 7 on some other paper. You pass them out, and then you draw. And the guy who had number 7 got this to keep it even. And there was even arguments there, and everybody's watching you and what you were doing. You couldn't cheat, at least I couldn't. But you know, they said, "Well, you gave that guy too much." Well, you do it. No, I don't want to do it. You do it. So they, as I said, then on the 23rd of April, we were liberated by Russian Cossacks on horseback. Believe it or not.
So it wasn't just the Russian pressure. You actually saw them come.
Oh, they came.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, I'd say it was 3, maybe 4 days before the Russians actually came. We were getting big numbers of Russian prisoners. Some of them were newer prisoners, you can tell by the uniform. Some of them had been collected from other camps that they were getting away from the Russians. Big numbers. They'd always come in, they would say, Ruskies kum, Ruskies kum, and the German guards were really getting, nervous,
What does that mean?
Russians are coming.
Russians
They're
are
coming.
coming.
Ruski kum, Russians. And on the morning of the 23rd, they did. They came on horses, wearing capes with that wooden board through them. And the only thing is they didn't carry sabers. They had a saber, but they carried a machine gun.
Wow.
That was a big difference. And we got to see them. They came to the camp gate. They didn't actually come into the camp. They went to where the camp offices were. And the Russians, they had a commissar, political commissar all the time. And they brought him in and they did stuff. And they didn't bring us any food, no medical stuff, nothing. They just liberated us. That was it. And then they said it would be wise if we stayed there for a while, because the front was fluid and they didn't know what to do. So once we got liberated, then of course we didn't have to stand roll call in the morning and the afternoon. That alone was killing a lot of us, because you'd have to stand there an hour and a half while in the cold while they counted time and time again. And the camp was in a flux. It was really a flux. And
what did the Germans do at this point?
they took off.
They
took off.
Before the
night,
Russians got there?
Yes, the night before the Russians came, they took off. And I don't know whatever happened. They just left. we had an interesting thing. Each nationality had what they called a man of confidence, who represented his group. You know, we had an American sergeant who was our man of confidence, and the English had and they had gathered after the Russians came. They gathered the men of confidence to see if they wanted to evacuate the camp or not, to walk toward the west, you know, toward the Americans. And it was decided that many people on the road, and an Air Force guy couldn't tell whether they were German soldiers or ex-POWs. They just didn't know. And they would shoot it up. So they, everybody elected to stay in the camp, except for the Poles. Poles hated the Russians. The Poles really hated the Russians. And that's where I found out about the Katyn massacre. That they talked about that, about the fact that they thought the Germans had killed all those Polish officers. It wasn't. It was the Russians who killed them. And by God, they took off. The Poles took off. I don't know where they went. They took off. And that was good because we took their barracks and started stripping the wood off for fire because we couldn't get into the town. The Russians said we better stay where we were. We couldn't cook anything, even if you wanted to, or shave or anything, because we had no fire. So we started stripping that down, and we used their barracks for fuel. But and the Russians brought us no food, nothing.
And had the Germans taken what was left, probably?
Oh, they took what they could, and don't forget now the civilians in the towns were still there, and they needed food. Everybody was running short, I think, or transportation was such that they couldn't get it where they needed it. That's may have been some of it too. I don't know. So they kept us there at Mühlberg for about 4 days, I think. Must have been. That would put it around the 27th of April. Then one morning they said, well, we're moving you to a better place. We're moving you to Riesa. That's a little town that was north of us. So we started walking. We walked to Riesa. Meantime, you're scrounging. You're scrounging all the time now. We had gone into Mühlberg, I remember, and we found a warehouse and broke it open, and we did get some food. We found some great Italian rations that were issued to the Italian army. It looked like big tubes, looked like toothpaste, only it was cheese. And you squeeze it out, it was good cheese. Well, everything tasted good. I don't know if it was good cheese or not.
Yeah.
But, you know, certain things like bread you couldn't get, stuff. But, so we're walking toward Riesa, and Joe, my friend, and I went into this house and we found a sack. At first we thought it was soap because it was underneath the sink. It turned out to be flour. It was real rough ground flour. Well, we took it naturally. And we walked into Riesa. We finally got there into this German barracks. And we went to town. And we made a deal with a baker. He made us a kuchen, and we gave him the flour. So that was good. We couldn't do anything with that flour except we couldn't do anything with it. We just didn't know what to do. We had a good time in Riesa, and how important food is. Joe and I were in the town, and we went. Had been a restaurant. You know, we could read. But then it had been an aid station. So we worked ourselves down to the first cellar, and we were looking for food. So we were looking for it. And we found some cans, but they were all peas. And there was a number on it, on the cans. And once you open one can, then that number would usually tell you what's in there. We didn't want peas, all peas. So we worked, and finally Joe says, hey, look at this. And it was a case up against a wall like that. And he moved it, and there was a door behind it. So he goes into that door, and it's another cellar down there. So we gone down there. In this room was all the sterling silver from an SS outfit on this table, on white tablecloths, and when they opened, we didn't even take one piece of it because we were looking for cans of food, preferably meat if we could get it. But that's
classic.
Because by that time at that place in Reisa, where the hell he came from, there was an English doctor. I'm not sure if he's a doctor or a dentist, but he was running the scales. Now, mind you, I'd been liberated now for about a week and a half, something like that. And I've been scrounging, trying to find stuff. And I don't know who was interested in my weight. A lot of stuff we just didn't know and didn't have enough sense to think about that thing. And so everybody had to be weighed. This guy weighed us. So I get on the scale and he weighs me. He weighs me full, all the clothes I have. He says, you weigh 14 stones. So what the hell's 14 stones? You look it up. Well, it turns out a stone is an English mark. It's 7 pounds. So 7 times 14, I was 98 pounds at that point in time.
With clothes on.
With the clothes on. And I still had these ulcers on my legs. And I had gotten, in this scrounging, some paper bandages, and they'd stick. And when I'd move the legs, they'd hurt. So Russians had a sick call. So I went down there, and there was a Russian nurse. She had 7 battles, 7 wound marks, 7 battle wounds. And her doctor, who was probably the most beautiful lady I ever saw, field doctor and a field nurse. They looked at my legs and they got some salve of some kind. I don't know. They wrapped it up with, and I don't understand a word of Russian, but they were probably swearing the whole time. They just swore. And so I was treated by a Russian doctor and a field nurse, in Raisa there. So we were in Raisa a little while. And a little while, meaning 2, 3 days, time sort of blurs. One day we we heard all this rifle fire going on. Oh my God, the Germans are making a counterattack. Where was it? It was May 8th, and the Russians, the war was over. They were shooting into the air, they were celebrating. And so we were, delirious as hell. Now we wanted to get back, but we couldn't get them back because they'd thrown guards around our camp, our barracks, and we couldn't get out. They wouldn't tell us why. So it was about a couple of days later or so, maybe 3 days, something of that order, 2 days, whatever. An American major drives up in a Jeep. And so a bunch of the guys went down there. I wasn't there at the time, but the guys who went down there told me later. Said the Russians were trying to strike a deal with the Americans who were coming from the other direction. They wanted to trade, what was it, so many American prisoners for so many Russian prisoners, German prisoners. The Russians wanted to get 10 to 1 or something like that. And that's why they wouldn't let us out. They were using us as sort of hostages.
Right.
He said, what we're doing. So he said, you know what? He says, we can't send any trucks. They won't let us send any trucks because this was still behind the Russian lines. But just take off. He said, they won't do anything. He said, just take off and head west. He said, eventually you'll find American or British or somebody.
Mhm.
So that's what we did about
Just a few of you, huh?
May 11th. No, everybody who was there from Newberry. We just took off. This horde sort of went west, and we lived off the land. We were scrounging. And on the 20 May, yeah, that was May 8th or something. On the 23rd of May, we came up on the Elbe River, and that river goes all over Germany. I think it was the Elbe. We came to it across from a town named Brümma. That river was the break point between the Americans and the Russians. You know, it had been pre-arranged, pre-agreed to. And we crossed over the bridge, and it was noon, around noon. The interesting point there is, who do we bump into when we went to go across the bridge was they call him a Barackenchef, the Germans did, which he was the barracks chief. He was an English sergeant who had spent 4 years in World War I, according to the story anyhow, as a prisoner, and 4 years in World War II as a prisoner. He was just a kid in World War I. And he had been taken prisoner by the Germans. And then he was an older man, of course, by World War II, but he was taken prisoner again. So he had spent something like 8 years in prison war camps. And he had written many books on, not many books, lots of paper on recipes. He had that many recipes from all over the world, because he got them from all these guys. And who do we bump into but that guy? We were constantly arguing about food, and the English were such a snob bunch of guys. I believe it was a Wednesday noon when we come in there. So trucks picked us up and took us to this German barracks. And the American captain said, "You guys must be hungry, right?" Yeah. So he said, "Go down to mess hall and I'll get you something to eat." Well, this is afternoon. By this time, it's around 1:30. The mess hall had been closed for about half an hour or so. So these 2 or 3 or 4 truckloads of whatever it was, mostly English. There were some Americans. We go down there. What do they have? But roast beef, vegetables, potatoes, white bread, dessert, fruit, canned fruit. I mean, really got a good meal. And the English, their mouths just dropped open. And iced tea. They'd never had iced tea. They had iced tea. And they said, "Lord blimey," said, "we don't eat this good on the King's holiday." So all that arguing we did in the camps, they thought maybe the Americans knew what they were talking about a little bit. But so from there, stayed there a couple days. Shipped this by truck to a place called Halle, Halle in Germany. It was a big Air Force base there, German Air Force base. And they flew us out of there to Reims in France, where we were given showers and clean uniforms, and spent about a day or two there. I guess sending records and stuff home. Then they put us on a hospital train, and we were to go to Le Havre to pick up boats. Take us home. But I had these leg ulcers that I told you about, and I needed more bandages because I took the shower and I lost my bandages, and I ran out of German bandages. So we were on the train, and there was a medic, tech sergeant, and I got him aside, and he had an Italian surname. I got next to him and said, "I need some bandages." "What's wrong?" So I told him. I went there, and he said, "Yeah." He said, come on with me. So he bandaged him in good American soft cloth bandages and some son of a gun. We got to a place called Fécamp, which is above the bluffs that go down into Le Havre. Called out my name again, and I had to go in the hospital. They put me in the hospital for about 2.5 weeks. So they built us back up.